Emblem is a 30-year-old video game series with a respectable collection of games accumulated over the years. Despite that, did you know that the Nintendo 64 was the only home console to never have a Fire Emblem game released for it? Though, for the record, this is counting Tokyo Mirage Sessions as the Wii U release, since I personally feel it counts since it has Marth and is an RPG and stuff. I mean, if you don't count it, then Wii U counts too, but I personally do, and Tokyo Mirage Sessions is a really cool name, and why am I rambling? Anywho, I mean, there was a Fire Emblem game planned for the Nintendo 64, more specifically the N64 which, you know, that's why it's in the video, but it personally makes me really sad that there never was a Fire Emblem game on this console, a console I grew up with and loved dearly, because it just makes me sad. Fire Emblem Ankoku no Miko, better known today as Fire Emblem 64 within the fanbase, was officially confirmed to be in development in 1997. Though this was kind of a rocky road to the actual confirmation, and the whole deal around it being confirmed is kind of, well, to start, this game was announced officially by Shigeru Miyamoto, who really doesn't have much to do with the development of Fire Emblem, as Intelligent Systems is pretty much who works on those games. To put that in perspective, Game Freak to Pokemon is Intelligent Systems to Fire Emblem, and it's been that way for quite some time, I believe, since the very first game. Miyamoto officially announced the 64 equivalent of the Fire Emblems a year after Genealogy of the Holy War, but basically during this confirmation of Fire Emblem 64, Miyamoto said that development was progressing steadily at a fairly quickly rate and that the game would likely release shortly after Mario RPG 2. Which is the original title for the first Paper Mario game, and it was changed due to Square Enix issues due to the title, and just, that's a whole thing. Now, information regarding Fire Emblem 64 is fairly scarce, though it is speculated that a 3D Fire Emblem was considered since the launch of the Nintendo 64. Though there are conflicting reports on this, as the original creator of Fire Emblem, Shozo Kaga, didn't seem to be too interested in making games for anything other than the Super Famicom, even in the late 90s. As a matter of fact, Kaga himself would later leave Intelligent Systems and make a game very similar in nature to Fire Emblem. And so, following Miyamoto's announcement of this game, a Japanese magazine titled 64 Dream followed the development of the game, following the official announcement, of course. And remember that interview with Miyamoto that we were just talking about that said that Fire Emblem 64 would come out after Mario RPG 2? Well, it originated from Dengeki Mao magazine, which is a seinen magazine produced by ASCII. See how I pronounce it right that time? This article was later translated to English and published to IGN.com, which, at least to me, is kind of interesting, as Fire Emblem was pretty unknown to Nintendo fans at that time, at least in the West, unless they were pretty in touch with what was going on in Japan, and the first Fire Emblem game to come out in the West was the Blazing Blade, a few years later following the success of Smash Bros. Melee. Could this be alluding to some kind of hidden truth? Could this mean that Fire Emblem could have been localized way earlier in the N64 days? Years before the Blazing Blade, or Fire Emblem as it's known on the GBA release in the West? Could the release and localization of Fire Emblem Anko no Miko have possibly reshaped and drastically changed the Fire Emblem series and continuity as we know it today? I don't know. Probably not. Also, did you know that there's this bonus disc that came with specific Mario Kart Double Dash pre-orders that had bonus items that could be transferred to the Blazing Blade Fire Emblem GBA? Like, it was a disc that had certain game demos and footage, but just happened to have, like, Fire Emblem items that you could transfer if you had the Fire Emblem game. And no, this has absolutely nothing to do with what we were just talking about, but it's interesting, I think. Okay, moving on. While there's not much known about Fire Emblem 64 as a game in itself, we do know these details, which I'll just, go ahead and list off for you right now. 1. It was going to be a mainline Fire Emblem game, same basic gameplay mechanics as previous mainline entries, of freaking course, but I might as well list it. 2. The game's main protagonist was named Ike, but not that Ike, as he looked a lot like Roy. This is not a mere coincidence, however, as many characters and game elements were repurposed for the Blazing Blade and Binding Blade. I just confused them. The one with Roy. Most of the things were repurposed for the one with Roy, so that would be Binding Blade. Yep, Binding Blade. 3. Other characters found in the concept art of Fire Emblem 64 had the same names as characters from the Binding Blade, and look somewhat similar. The only character that was not rewritten in any way appears to be Karel, or Carol, as he's pretty much the same character as he is in, the Binding Blade. As far as all the other characters rewritten that have some presence in the Binding Blade, here they all are on the screen to save me from, butchering their names like I probably just did with Karel. I'll go ahead and give you a minute to look them over. Okay, next, while on that topic, Fire Emblem 64 used a few character names that were later given to different characters. This includes Ike, Eliwood, and Owain, though that last one is the localized name of a character known as Eudes, I believe, in the Japanese release of Awakening. 5. We also know that there is one single screenshot available of this game to look at. Well, there's only one screenshot released to the public. This screenshot was published in the 2015 book, The Making of Fire Emblem, 25th Anniversary, Development Secrets, Awakening, and If. And for those of you who don't know, If is the Japanese name for Fates. The 3DS games that gave you a whole lot of waifu and husbando options, as well as, well, mainly a lot of that. This 25th anniversary art book is pretty much the biggest source of information when it comes to Fire Emblem 64. It's also where all that awesome character concept art comes from that I've been showing throughout. It's pretty much the only reliable and substantial source when looking into anything related to Fire Emblem 64. Though it is also worth mentioning that some sources state that the screenshot of Fire Emblem 64, that one sole screenshot, was available and shown through a Shoshinkai event while the game was in development. I'm not sure if this claim is true or if the facts are mixed up, but that is worth pointing out in the case that it was. 6. The very last thing we know about Fire Emblem 64, another detail revealed by the handy dandy, The Making of Fire Emblem, 25th Anniversary, Development Secret, is that FE64, and yes, I'm abbreviating it now when I'm almost done with this segment, eventually became Fire Emblem The Binding Blade. And I bet you couldn't have guessed that with how many times I mentioned BB so far, and yep, abbreviating that one too, even though it's hard to confuse it with Blazing Blade, but whatever! Though, despite the fact that there is a lot of clear evidence that the game did eventually become The Binding Blade, there are some that have even speculated that Fire Emblem 64 eventually became Path of Radiance instead and not Binding Blade. Though the confirmation in the anniversary book kind of confirms that it is now, Binding Blade and not Path of Radiance. It is, however, possible that some assets carried over to Roy's game with others going to Ike's game, but there isn't really anything concrete to prove this theory. Hey guys, it is me in the editing room, or whatever you want to call it, and I just realized, and I have no idea how I missed this when I was actually recording and doing the script, but there's a script, an actual script for Fire Emblem 64, like a tentative one that was made when it was like in the Fire Emblem 64 era of its development, if you will, or whatever I'm saying. I'm not really sure right now, very sleep deprived. But yeah, there's a script, there is a link to it that I'll provide in the description. There's also an English translation of it. You're probably looking at it right now too, but yep, forgot to add that. I guess that's number 9 on my list or whatever this is. So yeah. Much like many games created for, or at the very least planned for the 64DD, Fire Emblem 64 ended up being very ambitious. So much so that the hardware it was being developed for just couldn't handle it. Shozo Kaga himself even admitted this in 1999 while also saying that the next game in development in the Fire Emblem series was now Tracia 776 rather than 64. Very difficult game, by the way. This was unfortunately the end of the line, as later that year in 64 Dream magazine, Fire Emblem 64 was confirmed to be officially cancelled. If Fire Emblem 64 came out on the 64DD, it could have possibly rivaled RPGs like Final Fantasy VII. I mean, that's a long shot because back in that era, Final Fantasy VII was pretty huge and pretty expansive, which, you know, that's why it was on the PlayStation and not on the Nintendo 64, just because it's a very big and very ambitious game for the time period. It did not age well, but it was huge back then. So, I mean, take my hot take here with a grain of salt, but I really do think if this game came out, like, as far as 3D RPGs back then, I think it could have had, like, you know, positive reception and just a lot of interest in it just because it's a 3D RPG and, you know, we never truly saw a release 3D Fire Emblem until the GameCube era, and at that point there were plenty of 3D RPGs, so I mean, if it came out a little earlier, like a 3D Fire Emblem, I think it would have made a big impact, and that's just my opinion, of course. As it stands, I mean, again, it's a big shame this game never came out. But again, I mean, I stand for Fire Emblem in just general, and it's a big shame just to me because I have that bias.